Growing up, what did you want to be? A fireman? A policeman? Well, how about a cowboy? A Wild West cowboy? Maybe a bull rider or a bronc rider? Or just go on a cattle drive? The Wild West. Cowboys and Indians. Cattle drives. Gunfighters, and let's not forget to mention the famous outlaws like Jesse James, Billy the Kid, Belle Starr, and many more. Welcome to Style Ministries. I'm your host, Wayne Dickinson. Love is patient, love is kind, it never fails. Living in style means show them your love every day. Walk in faith, walk in hope, walk in love, the greatest gift of all. Today we're going to start a new series on how the West was won. So sit back, pretend you're in the saddle, and we'll look into the Wild West together. Greetings today, Western Heritage and Outlaw fans. 27 miles west of my home in the southwestern part of the great state of Oklahoma sits a famous town named Marlow. Marlow is the geographical dot that became a famous movie in 1965 starring the one and only, the Duke, Mr. John Wayne himself.
Donovan. Tom Donovan. Think you can make it, Pilgrim? Hey, Pilgrim, you're gonna need a couple of stitches. Whoa, take her easy there, Pilgrim. Well, don't fret about that, Pilgrim. Like I say, Pilgrim, you can eat here till you get back on your feet. Well, Pilgrim, Ransom Stoddard, attorney at law. You're a persistent cuss, Pilgrim. Well, take some advice, Pilgrim.
The Marlow Brothers and the Sons of Katie Elder. The setting is in Marlow, Oklahoma. Marlow is located in Stevens County, 10 miles north of Duncan. The town was named for one of its prominent original residents, Dr. Williamson Marlow, who settled there from Missouri in early 1880 with his wife Martha Jane and their boys George, Charlie, Alfred, Boone, and Llewellyn, better known as Ep. Dr. Marlow provided care for residents in his community until his death in 1885. Today, Redbud Park is located on the Marlow family's former homestead where they maintained a small ranch. Despite the doctor's benevolent deeds on the Oklahoma frontier, the town is better remembered for his sons and their valiant fight against the vigilante forces at great odds. In 1965, the story of the Fighting Marlow Brothers was presented in a classic American Western, The Sons of Katie Elder. If you have seen this movie, then you have an introduction to the violent story of injustice and mob rule on the American frontier. The Marlow brothers had experienced no trouble with the law until 1885, when Boone shot and killed a cowboy in Vernon, Texas. The shooting was apparently a case of self-defense, and the charges were dropped due to a lack of evidence. Regardless, Boone knew that law and order on the American frontier was a funny thing, and the family moved to Trinidad, Colorado for about a year, hoping that the matter would be forgotten. By 1888, the family had returned to Indian Territory and living near Anadarko when the brothers were suspected of stealing cattle from Colorado. In August, Deputy U.S. Marshal Edward Johnson from Graham, Texas, in Young County, led a posse north across the Red River and arrested Charlie, Alfred, Boone, and Ep. Marshal Johnson had lost his right arm months earlier after he was wounded in a gunfight But the tenacious old lawman took little time getting back to work. The brothers were taken to Graham until their case could be heard before a grand jury. The Marlow family relocated to Graham, where they rented a cabin and patiently waited for the brothers' day in court. During their stay, George had gone to the jail for a visit on October 6th and was also arrested on the same charges. In late October, the grand jury heard the brothers' case and bound them over for trial, scheduled in March the following year. In the meantime, the boys' mother had appealed to the rancher who owned their cabin, Oscar Denson, to help arrange bail, and by December the family was reunited. The charges against the brothers seemed weak, and the family was confident that the trial was only a formality to find them not guilty. While the boys were in custody, Marshall Johnson learned about the cowboy that Boone had killed 3 years earlier in Vernon. Despite any acquittal, the old lawman sought a warrant for his arrest. In mid-December, young County Sheriff Marion Wallace rode to the Marlow's cabin to serve the warrant. The lawmen arrived just as the family was sitting down to dinner and were invited to join them. Collier declined, then announced, "I've come for you, Boone." The deputy drew his revolver and fired, missing Boone, who returned fire with a Winchester, splintering the door frame and nicking Collier. From around the corner of the cabin as Boone fired his second shot and was mortally wounded, struck in his side. Ebb rode to town for a doctor and was subsequently jailed himself. Collier returned to the cabin with a posse and arrested Charlie, who was present during the shooting, and also George and Alf, who had been miles away at the time. Even though the sheriff was shot accidentally, Boone ran, earning him a price on his head that totaled $1,700. When Wallace died on Christmas Eve, Deputy Collier replaced him as sheriff. The brothers heard their jailers discuss lynching and decided on an escape plan. They obtained a large knife from a fellow inmate and used it to chip away through the cell wall to temporary freedom on January 14th. Upon their recapture, Collier took the brothers to a local blacksmith and, just like in the movie, had them chained together in pairs with leg irons, George to Ep and Charlie to Alf. The brothers were returned to Graham Jail, where they just before midnight on January 17th, jailers attempted to hand them over to a lynch mob. At gunpoint, they refused to exit their cell and stood their ground. A member of the mob, Bob Hill, grabbed Charlie, who punched him in response. Hill fell back, striking his head on the cell bars, and later died from his injury. Alf was armed with a section of lead pipe, and together, the hobbled and barely armed brothers fought off the barbaric, bloodthirsty vigilantes who finally just gave up and left. On the following day, the story of the mob's actions was spun in their favor when they claimed that the jail had been attacked by 40 outlaws, led by Boone Marlow, in an attempt to rescue his brothers. Luckily, Sheriff Collier and his men had bravely responded in defense. Deputy Johnson learned about the mob and telegraphed U.S. Marshal William Cable in Dallas for advice. On January 19th, the marshal ordered him to transport the brothers to the jail in Weatherford, 60 miles southeast. Johnson arrived at the jail and organized the prisoners' transfer for the same evening. That trip to Weatherford was supposed to be a secret, but the news was leaked. The problem for Johnson was that he didn't know at least 3 of the jailers and other men recruited to assist them in the transfer had also been part of the lynch mob. The lawmen wouldn't learn this until it was too late. When the procession of lawmen and prisoners prepared to leave Graham at 9 p.m., there were about 30 men loitering on the street. The Marlow brothers wondered if the transfer was nothing more than a setup for an ambush. although they were reassured to the contrary by Deputy Johnson when Charlie saw the familiar faces of the mob from the previous night waiting outside the jail. He explained, "You lied to us, Ed. You are taking us out to be mobbed again." Johnson vehemently denied the accusation, prompting Charlie to challenge, "If they do, will you give us guns?" "Yes," the old lawman insisted, "and die with you if it comes to that." Unfortunately, just a couple miles east of Graham, the convoy was ambushed by a mob composed of 15 to 40 people. George Marlow eventually testified that the guards who were supposed to be protecting them actually provided the mob with weapons. Because of their shackles, the prisoners could not run or hide, but managed to get to the wagon carrying the extra guns and ammunition. They held out until the mob retreated, but unfortunately, both Llewellyn and Alfred were killed, leaving their injured brothers shackled to their dead sibling. One guard and 2 mob members were also dead. George and Charlie had to free themselves from their brothers by cutting off the shackled feet of Llewellyn and Alfred. They went back to their home, expecting the mob to return at any time. Sadly, Boone was poisoned and shot to death for reward money, though. His killers and the angry mob were ultimately brought to justice. George and Charlie were later acquitted and moved away to become law enforcement officers. Visitors can still see artifacts from the original Marlow family at the Marlow Area Museum. If you haven't seen the movie The Sons of Katie Elder, I highly recommend that you watch it. Especially if you're a John Wayne fan, how can you go wrong? Although it ended sadly, it's a part of the Old West. It was ruthless, and outlaws and bounty hunters made their way across the country in search of faces they see on the posters and money that they can collect. Well, thank you so much for being with me today on Style Podcast about the Old West and the Marlow Brothers. I encourage you to go to the museum, go visit Marlow, Oklahoma. Remember, style means show them you love every day, so show somebody you love them, and they'll show you back. And we'll see you next time, and watch for more on the Old West, coming soon. Ride high in that saddle. God loves you.